She came home hours earlier than expected and froze in the doorway when she saw her billionaire estate's janitor sitting on the floor, playing with her son as if they'd known each other forever. Charlotte Bennett had not planned on returning home that afternoon. Her meeting with a European investor had been postponed at the last moment, and instead of instructing the driver to take her back to the corporate headquarters, she told him to turn toward the long, winding road that led to her estate. The sky was washed in pale winter sunlight, the cypress trees casting dark, delicate shadows over the driveway as the car rolled up toward the wrought iron gates. She almost never came home before sunset, and there was a strange sense of trespassing in her own life as she stepped out, heels clicking on the stone pathway. Inside, the mansion was as pristine as always. The marble floors gleamed. The scent of fresh flowers from the conservatory drifted faintly through the air. She could hear the muffled hum of the household running on its clockwork routine, the quiet shuffle of the gardener's tools outside, the soft voices of staff passing by. It was all familiar, all controlled. She removed her leather gloves as she walked down the main corridor toward the winter garden, intending to find the nanny and check in on Evan. He had been unusually withdrawn lately. Not that unusually meant much anymore, given how closed off he had been since the accident. As she neared the arched doorway, she caught the sound of a man's voice, low, steady, and playful in a way that didn't seem rehearsed. She stopped just before stepping in. The winter garden had been transformed. Where there was usually a wide expanse of polished tile and a scattering of antique furniture, there was now a sprawling, imaginative chaos. A cardboard rocket standing proudly in the center, painted in bright reds and silvers, the nose cone capped with tinfoil. A control panel made from a repurposed box, its surface covered with bottle caps and old buttons. Strings of fairy lights stretched overhead like a constellation, their glow soft and warm. Her son Evan sat cross-legged on the rug inside the rocket's open doorway, wearing a cardboard helmet that was slightly too big for his head. He looked serious, intent on the world they'd built together. Opposite him, kneeling on one knee, was a man in a gray work uniform, sleeves rolled to the elbows, dark hair neatly kept despite a day's work. It took Charlotte a moment to place him. She'd passed him in the halls before, never speaking beyond the polite nod of employer to staff. The janitor, Noah. "Commander Evan," he said in a stage whisper, "are we ready for launch?" Evan nodded gravely and then, as Charlotte's heart jolted in surprise, smiled. It was quick, shy, but it was real. "Engines on," Noah murmured, tapping one of the makeshift controls. He clapped softly and the fairy lights flickered as though something enormous had just powered up. The rocket shuddered slightly, or perhaps it was only the boy's imagination filling in the rest. Evan's eyes widened, his lips curving just a little more as he leaned forward, listening to the engine hum Noah made with a quiet vibration in his throat. Charlotte felt an unexpected tightness in her chest. For months she had tried everything: speech therapy, occupational therapy, expensive specialists flown in from out of state. And yet here was her son, smiling in the company of a man paid to sweep floors and polish windows. She had forgotten what his smile looked like when it wasn't coaxed out by a camera or a doctor. Noah glanced up mid-scene, perhaps sensing her presence. The moment his gaze caught hers, he froze, as if he'd been caught trespassing in a forbidden place. He stood quickly, clearing his throat. "Miss Bennett," he said, his voice shifting into formality. "I'm sorry, this was during my break. I should have—" Charlotte opened her mouth to say something sharp, something about boundaries, about keeping to one's duties. That was the language she knew, the one she had learned in boardrooms and under the weight of her last name. But the words tangled in her throat as she glanced at Evan, who was peeking out from the rocket, a faint hope still in his eyes that the game wasn't over yet. "Go on," she said finally. Her own voice surprised her. Quiet, not a command but an allowance. Noah blinked, uncertain. "Ma'am?" "Go on," she repeated, gesturing toward the rocket. For the briefest moment, something softened in his expression. Not gratitude exactly, but a kind of understanding. He crouched back down to Evan's level. "Commander, we're cleared for takeoff." Evan grinned again, retreating into the cardboard capsule, and Charlotte stayed where she was, leaning against the doorway, watching as the two of them began their countdown. She didn't know why she was still there, or why she felt that stepping away might break whatever fragile thread had formed between them. She only knew she had walked into her home expecting silence, and instead found a rocket on the rug, her son smiling, and a janitor who looked at him like the boy was more than just a billionaire's child. Like he was the only person in the room that mattered. Charlotte had not planned to see him again so soon, but the following morning after Evan had been taken to the upstairs playroom, she asked the butler to bring Noah to the small study near the library. It was a room she rarely used, paneled in dark wood with tall windows that let in long rectangles of pale winter light. The space smelled faintly of old leather and paper, a place meant for measured, serious conversation. When Noah arrived, he hesitated at the doorway, cap in hand, the clean gray of his uniform pressed but worn at the seams. His posture was cautious, as though he'd been summoned to answer for some unspoken offense. Charlotte gestured toward the chair opposite her desk, then sat back, studying him for a moment before speaking. "Did you know Evan doesn't speak?" she asked quietly, without preamble. Noah shifted in his chair, glancing toward the window before meeting her gaze. "I suspected," he said. "He doesn't avoid people the way shy kids do. He avoids their eyes. But when he looked at the rocket yesterday," his mouth quirked faintly, almost a smile. "His eyes were loud." She leaned forward slightly, her brows knitting. "Why did you build all of that? The rocket? The lights? The entire launch pad in my winter garden?" He looked down at the cap in his hands, turning it slowly, as if collecting his words. "In my old life, I built interactive installations. Simple ones. Sensory panels, toy prototypes, things that made kids curious, that made them feel like they were in control of something. My wife," he paused, his jaw tightening before he continued. "She loved to help. We had a daughter, and we used to turn our living room into whole worlds. After my wife passed, I guess I kept building worlds out of nothing. For her, for my daughter." Charlotte's chest tightened at the quiet matter-of-factness in his voice. She realized she was staring and looked down at her own hands instead. "My husband died in a plane crash," she said softly. "Evan stopped talking soon after. The doctors tell me it's going to take time, that therapy will help. We've had time. We've had therapy. We haven't had much progress." Noah nodded slowly, not filling the silence with empty reassurance. "I'm asking you," she said finally, "to spend time with him. Keep building whatever it is you were building. I'll cover the cost of materials, the hours, whatever you need. She hesitated, the words heavy on her tongue. "Don't make me promises you can't keep." He lifted his eyes to hers, steady now. "No promises, and no titles. I'm not a therapist, Miss Bennett. I'm a father who knows how to make things." She exhaled, something in her shoulders loosening. "That will be enough." For a moment, the study was silent, except for the ticking of the old mantel clock. She realized she had dismissed him in her mind yesterday as a fluke, a kind-hearted employee who had stumbled into a moment. But now, sitting across from him, she saw the intentionality in what he'd done. The way he spoke about Evan as a person, not a problem to be solved. The way he didn't fill the air with flattery or self-defense. Noah stood to leave, placing his cap back on his head. "I'll start tomorrow morning," he said simply. Charlotte nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure why she felt the urge to walk him to the door herself. As they stepped into the hallway, she caught a glimpse of Evan on the landing above, leaning over the banister, watching them both. His small face was unreadable, but his eyes followed Noah until he disappeared down the back corridor toward the staff quarters. Charlotte lingered there a moment longer, her hand on the banister, wondering if this was the first step towards something she couldn't yet name, and if she was ready for it. Noah began arriving earlier than his shift required. It was not something they had formally agreed upon, but the next morning, when Charlotte walked through the hall on her way to a conference call, she noticed him quietly unpacking a worn canvas bag in the corner. Inside were scraps of cardboard, rolls of colored tape, a handful of small LED lights, and a few curious gadgets she didn't immediately recognize. Evan was sitting cross-legged on the rug nearby, watching with the guarded fascination of someone who isn't sure yet if he's allowed to be excited. Noah worked without hurrying, narrating what he was doing in a low, steady tone. "This is going to be our mission control," he explained, holding up a piece of cardboard. "Over here is the runway. We'll use the rug for that, and the couch is the cloud layer. The staircase? That's a good lunar ladder." Evan's gaze flickered between Noah's hands and the growing launch pad, and Charlotte, standing half hidden in the doorway, could see the subtle shift in his posture. Less rigid, more open. By the third morning, Noah had introduced a reward system. Small, circular stickers with hand-drawn symbols. A smile earned the sun badge, making eye contact earned the moon, and touching Noah's hand or passing him a piece of the equipment earned the star. Evan didn't collect many at first, but when he did, he studied them carefully, lining them up in a neat row on the floor. On the fourth day, Noah pulled from his bag a small homemade device, a cube of smooth wood with tiny holes drilled across the surface. He set it in the middle of the rug and flicked a switch. Soft ocean waves filled the air, accompanied by a scattering of flickering lights that danced across the ceiling like a lazy constellation. Evan blinked, sitting up straighter. He inched closer to the cube, his fingers brushing the edge. "You can turn the lights up," Noah said, pointing to a small dial. "Or make the waves louder. Want to try?" For a moment, Evan didn't move. Then cautiously, he turned the dial, and the room filled with the sound of a stronger tide. He glanced at Noah, a faint crease between his brows. "More?" Noah asked, giving a small thumbs up. Evan looked directly at him for several seconds, his lips parting. Charlotte, who had been lingering just beyond the archway, held her breath without realizing it. She saw his mouth form a shape, saw the tiniest movement of air. "More," Evan whispered, the sound rough, almost unused. Noah didn't react with the surprise Charlotte felt clawing at her chest. He didn't clap or exclaim. Instead, his voice remained calm and matter-of-fact. "Of course, Commander. More." He turned the dial up gently, as though the word had been spoken 1,000 times before. Evan sat back, the corners of his mouth twitching in something between a smile and concentration. Charlotte stood frozen in the doorway, the quiet joy of the moment pressing against her ribs until she felt she might burst. Later that afternoon, after Evan had gone upstairs for his nap, Charlotte found Noah in the staff hallway, winding up the string of lights he had used earlier. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice softer than she intended. Noah glanced up. "It was him," he replied. "I just held the flashlight." As she walked away, Charlotte realized it had been a very long time since anyone had made her feel that her son's small victories were not miracles to be performed on demand, but moments to be respected, protected, and shared in silence. The storm came without warning. By early evening, the wind was rattling the tall windows, and thick clouds had swallowed the last of the winter daylight. Charlotte was in her upstairs office reviewing quarterly projections when the first crack of thunder shook the house. A moment later, the lights flickered and went out entirely. The backup generator hummed somewhere deep in the walls, but the transition was sluggish. The mansion was left in a dim, uncertain silence. Downstairs, the staff moved quickly but without much coordination. The butler went to check the electrical panel, the cook lit candles in the kitchen, and the nanny stood at the base of the staircase calling for Evan, her voice tight with unease. Charlotte pushed back from her desk, hurrying down to the first floor, but before she reached the main hall, she saw a flash of light outside. Lightning, sudden and blinding. The thunder that followed was so loud it seemed to come from inside the house. Charlotte's heart jumped, and she knew without seeing that Evan would not handle it well. He had never liked storms, but since the accident, they reduced him to a state of pure panic. She found him in the corner of the sitting room, wedged under a small table, his knees pulled up to his chest and his hands clamped tightly over his ears. The nanny hovered helplessly nearby, murmuring things he could not hear over the pounding in his own head. Then from the side hallway, Noah appeared. He didn't rush. His steps were steady, his expression calm. In his hands were two small palm-sized lights, the same kind he'd used for their space missions, glowing in a warm amber tone. He crouched a few feet from Evan, setting one light on the floor and the other beside him. "Storm on Mars, Commander," he said in the same even voice he always used during their games. "We need to stay in the capsule until it passes." Evan peeked at him from under the table, his eyes wide. Another flash of lightning lit the room and he flinched violently, burying his face against his knees. Noah slid under the table to join him, careful not to crowd the boy. He clicked both lights to a softer glow, filling the space with a small, protective circle of warmth. "Here's the mission," he murmured. "3 booms. That's the storm. After each one, we count to 3 together. Ready?" There was no verbal answer, but Evan's eyes met his for half a second before darting away again. That was enough for Noah. The next thunderclap rolled through the house like a wave. 1, 2, 3, Noah counted, slow and steady. The boy's lips moved silently along with him. The next boom came. 1, 2, 3. This time Evan whispered the numbers. The sound was barely there, but Charlotte, standing a few feet away in the shadows, heard it as if it were a shout. When the third roll of thunder came, Evan didn't flinch quite as hard. He pressed his palms to the floor, then reached out, small fingers curling around the sleeve of Noah's uniform. "Noah," he said, his voice hoarse but deliberate. Charlotte's hand flew to her mouth. She had not heard her son say a person's name in more than a year. The word seemed to hang in the dim air, heavy with its own quiet triumph. Noah didn't make it into a spectacle. He simply nodded. "Yeah, buddy, I'm right here." The storm dragged on for another 15 minutes, but by the time the lights came back and the nanny returned from checking the upstairs windows, Evan was sitting cross-legged beside Noah, both of them illuminated by the small, steady beacons. Charlotte didn't interrupt. She just stood there, committing every detail to memory. The soft light, the quiet counting, the way her son's hand didn't let go of Noah's sleeve until long after the thunder had moved on. The storm had passed, but by the next morning, a different kind of turbulence arrived, one that came not from the sky, but from the outside world. Charlotte woke to a flurry of urgent messages from her PR director, all with the same subject line. "Have you seen this?" She opened the first link and felt her stomach knot. On the front page of a popular gossip site was a photo of the winter garden, taken from the doorway, the cardboard rocket, the string lights, and in the middle of it all, Noah crouched beside Evan, holding what looked like a small control panel. The headline screamed, "Billionaire CEO leaves traumatized son with janitor. Therapy or risk?" The accompanying text was worse, speculative paragraphs painting her as a neglectful mother experimenting on her child with the help of unqualified staff. By the time she got to her office, the PR team was already in damage control mode. Board members were calling one after another, their voices tight with disapproval. "Charlotte, risk management is key. This looks terrible for the company. What will our investors think? You can't let a stranger be the face of your child's recovery. It's dangerous." Even the nanny, who had been outwardly polite about Noah's involvement, suggested coolly that it was time to end the games and return to structured clinical therapy. "They think I'm not protecting my son," Charlotte said when she found Noah later that morning, working in the garden shed where he kept his tools and supplies. He was repairing a broken lamp, his movements deliberate, unhurried. "They think you're dangerous." He set the lamp down, wiping his hands on a rag before meeting her eyes. "Dangerous is whoever took that photo," he said quietly. "And whoever fed it to the press." She narrowed her gaze. "You think it came from inside the house?" "I think it's obvious," he replied. "Only a handful of people are in that part of the mansion during the day. You've got staff who've worked here for years and one person who's been less than subtle about not liking what we've been doing." Charlotte knew exactly who he meant. "I can leave," Noah continued. "It's your reputation. And his safety comes before me." He reached into his back pocket and pulled out his staff badge, placing it on the workbench between them. "No," Charlotte said sharply. She pushed the badge back toward him. "If you leave, Evan will go backward. I will not undo what we've started because of a headline." She called her head of security that afternoon. By the evening, they had confirmed the leak. The head nanny, whose personal blog, under a pseudonym, had a history of criticizing modern, unproven child therapies. The blog had been the first place the photo appeared before it was picked up by the tabloids. Charlotte fired her the same day. The woman left without protest, her expression smug, as if certain that the damage was already done. And in some ways, she wasn't wrong. By that night, the gossip site had spun an entire follow-up piece questioning Charlotte's judgment under emotional strain. But there was one thing the nanny hadn't accounted for. The story had also triggered something else. Dozens of parents in online forums defending the rocket, the lights, and Noah himself. They called him the kind of person we all wish our kids had in their lives. Charlotte read those comments in bed that night, her phone screen glowing in the dark, and realized she felt no uncertainty about her decision. Whatever the noise outside, Noah would stay. Not because he was a symbol for the press to dissect, but because when the storm had hit, real or otherwise, he was the one Evan had reached for. And that mattered more than all the boardroom opinions in the world. The fallout from the article didn't fade as quickly as Charlotte had hoped. By the end of the week, the scandal had seeped beyond gossip columns into business blogs and investor newsletters. The board of Bennett Group scheduled an emergency advisory meeting, which Charlotte knew was their polite term for an intervention. When she arrived in the boardroom, the mood was already set. 12 pairs of eyes, all in tailored suits, watched her take her seat at the head of the long glass table. The chairman cleared his throat. Charlotte, we've reviewed the situation. The optics are bad. We recommend sending Evan to a private residential clinic for a month. Discreetly. Let the professionals handle his recovery. This janitor involvement, however well-intentioned, looks reckless. Charlotte's knuckles tightened on the arms of her chair. You're suggesting I take my son out of his home and place him with strangers after he's finally shown signs of opening up? It's a temporary measure, another board member said, his tone smooth, for the sake of his stability and the company's reputation. She didn't answer them in that moment, but by the time the meeting ended, she knew she wouldn't agree. Still, she needed perspective, so she sought Noah out in the winter garden later that afternoon. He was kneeling by the rocket, reinforcing one of the cardboard panels with duct tape. Evan sat nearby, drawing a new mission badge with a felt-tipped pen. Charlotte waited until the boy was too focused on his work to listen before speaking quietly. The board wants to send Evan away, a month in a clinic. They're calling it an evaluation. Noah didn't look up immediately. And what do you think? I think they're treating him like a risk assessment, not a person. Her voice was low, sharper than she meant it to be. But they're pressuring me. They're saying I'm too close to see clearly. Noah sat back on his heels and met her gaze. They see PR. I see a kid who said 2 words for the first time in a year. If you send him away now, you'll teach him that trust is temporary, that the second the outside world disapproves, the people he relies on will vanish. Charlotte's jaw tightened. What do you suggest? Because I can't ignore them entirely. Don't ignore them. Outplay them. Tell the truth before they can twist it again. Call what's happening by its real name. A boy reconnecting with his world. Tell them you're not hiding it. You're sharing it. Make it public in a way they can't attack without looking heartless. She frowned. You're suggesting I hand the press an open invitation into my life? I'm suggesting you lead with honesty. It's rare enough to be powerful. He glanced toward Evan, who was carefully pressing a star-shaped sticker onto the rocket. And if you really want to make it unassailable, make it bigger than just him. You've got resources most people don't. Use them. Start something for other kids who need a place where it's safe to take small steps. Call it whatever you want, but let it be his idea and spirit. Charlotte was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on her son. She imagined the board's reaction, the headlines, the scrutiny. But she also imagined Evan's eyes dimming again, the cardboard rocket dismantled, the space between them widening back into silence. Finally, she said, if I do this, we do it together. Not as CEO and employee, as, what, co-captains? Noah smiled faintly. Co-captains works. The next morning, Charlotte drafted a statement herself, ignoring the carefully sanitized versions her PR team sent over. It began with 4 words she'd never used in a public speech. I am a mother. And by the time she sent it to her communications director for release, she felt something she hadn't in weeks. Control, not in the corporate sense, but the kind that comes from deciding who you are before someone else decides for you. The press day was unlike anything Bennett Group had hosted before. There were no luxury cars lined up in the driveway, no grand catering spreads, no glittering product displays. Instead, the front doors of the mansion opened to reveal a transformed hall, warm amber lighting spilling across the floor, tactile panels along the walls for children to touch and explore. And in the center, the cardboard rocket still standing, proudly from the first day Noah and Evan had built it together. The control panel had been upgraded. Neat rows of switches and buttons salvaged from discarded electronics, each one clicking with a satisfying sound. There was music too, soft and inviting, not the usual sterile corporate soundtrack, but something that made the space feel like a living room. Charlotte had insisted on no stage perfection. She wanted the journalists and photographers to see exactly what this was. A home, not a showroom. When the first guests arrived, parents from employee families, a few local reporters, and some invited charity representatives. She greeted them not from behind a podium, but standing in the middle of the hall, her blue suit crisp, but her expression open, unguarded. "I am a CEO," she began, once the room had filled enough that the low murmur of voices quieted. "But before that, I am a mother. My son, Evan, has been through something no child should endure. For over a year, he stopped speaking. Specialists told me it would take time, and we gave it time. But what he needed most wasn't something I could hire or schedule. What he needed was a safe place to play, to imagine, and to connect, and a person who would meet him there without expecting anything in return." She glanced to her right, where Noah stood awkwardly near the edge of the crowd, hands clasped loosely. In front of him, "That person," she continued, "is Noah Carter. Some of you may know him as the man in the tabloid headlines. I know him as the father who helped my son smile again." There were cameras clicking, but Charlotte ignored them. She told the story plainly, about the rocket, about the missions in the winter garden, about how Evan had spoken his first word in a year under the soft glow of a makeshift constellation. And then she made the announcement. Bennett Group would be funding an initiative called A Home Where It's Not Scary, sensory play zones installed in workplaces, hospitals, and community centers, designed for children coping with trauma. Noah would serve as the program's curator, with full creative freedom to design and oversee each project. The reaction in the room shifted. Reporters who had come expecting another scandal began scribbling notes with a different urgency. Parents approached Noah, some thanking him outright, others asking if their children could try the rocket. Within minutes, the hall was alive with laughter and the soft chatter of children pressing buttons, watching lights blink, and pretending to steer into space. Charlotte kept one eye on Evan through it all. He was in the rocket's cockpit with two other children, patiently showing them which switches launched the engines. Every so often, he glanced toward her, not with anxiety, but to see if she was watching. She always was. By the time the event wound down, the mansion's hall looked as it had hours before, warm, lived in, touched by small hands and unafraid of imperfection. As the last guest left, Evan trotted over to her, tugging lightly at her sleeve. "Mama," he said, his voice still quiet but clear. "More space." Charlotte's throat tightened, and she crouched to meet his eyes. "Always," she promised. For the first time in months, she didn't feel like she was balancing between two worlds. The cold precision of the boardroom and the fragile intimacy of her home. Instead, both had merged into something whole, something that felt like it belonged to them, and to anyone who needed it. And she knew this was just the launch, not the landing. It had been 3 months since the day Charlotte opened her home and her story to the world. In that time, the Home Where It's Not Scary initiative had grown faster than even she expected. The first public play zone was installed in a children's hospital wing in Boston, then another in a community center in Detroit. Local news outlets covered the ribbon cuttings, but what struck Charlotte most were the private letters. Handwritten notes from parents describing their children's first unguarded laughs in months, or their tentative steps into spaces they'd once avoided out of fear. Noah spent most of his time traveling between these locations, not in a corporate oversight role, but with sleeves rolled up, on the floor with a glue gun, or wiring up a panel of blinking lights. His designs had evolved too. There were cardboard castles, glowing caves, a cloud ship made from layers of gauzy fabric that swayed gently when children moved through it. But no matter the setting, there was always one small nod to the original rocket, a button that, when pressed, lit up a constellation overhead. Evan accompanied them to several of the openings. The boy who once hid under tables now walked into crowded rooms without shrinking back. He didn't speak to everyone, but when he did, it was purposeful, and his eyes no longer darted around looking for an escape. He had even begun introducing himself. "I'm Evan. I'm a captain." Charlotte never corrected him. One evening after returning from a trip to Chicago where they'd opened their fifth site, Charlotte found herself lingering in the winter garden. The rocket was still there, though it was worn now from months of use. The paint was chipped, the cardboard dented. She considered asking Noah to build a new one, but something in her resisted. This was the original launch pad, and it had earned its place. Noah came in quietly carrying 2 mugs of tea. He set one down on the low table beside her. "You're thinking about replacing it," he said, nodding toward the rocket. "I was," she admitted, but I think I like it this way. Imperfect. He smiled faintly. It's still solid where it matters. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, the quiet hum of the mansion around them. Then Charlotte spoke again, her voice thoughtful. When this started, I thought I was just hiring you to fill a gap, give him something I couldn't. I didn't realize you'd change the way I see all of it. Noah looked at her for a long moment, then down into his mug. You didn't hire me for him, he said finally. You hired me for you. You just didn't know it yet. The words landed heavier than she expected, not in a way that hurt, but in a way that made her feel suddenly unguarded. She didn't answer, and he didn't press her to. A soft patter of small footsteps broke the stillness. Evan appeared in the doorway, rubbing his eyes, his hair sticking up in every direction from sleep. He walked straight to the rocket, climbed inside, and looked back at them. Come on, he said simply. Charlotte and Noah exchanged a glance before both rising to join him. They squeezed into the cockpit, knees bent awkwardly in the small space, and Evan handed each of them a sticker badge. The moon for Charlotte, the star for Noah. Mission? Noah asked. Evan nodded. Home! They didn't count down this time. They just sat there, the three of them, in the warm glow of the fairy lights, letting the quiet fill in the rest. And for Charlotte, it was the first time in years she realized she wasn't waiting for something to break. She was already there. To me, the ending works beautifully because it's not about a grand, cinematic twist. It's about an emotional landing that feels earned. Charlotte's journey isn't just going from cold CEO to warm mother. It's about learning that vulnerability doesn't weaken her. It completes her. Noah's presence didn't fix Evan in some magical instant. Instead, it created a safe space where healing could happen naturally, without pressure or deadlines. What I love most is that the final scene in the rocket isn't about status, money, or proving anything to the outside world. It's about three people who've been broken in different ways quietly choosing to be a family, even if they never put that label on it. And Evan's single word, home, is the perfect full circle moment. The rocket might be cardboard, the lights just fairy bulbs, but in that small, worn space, they've built something more valuable than any mansion or company: belonging. That's why the ending lingers, because it tells you the real success here isn't measured in headlines, but in the trust they've built together.